Picture this, you're scrolling through Book Talk at 2 a.m., and suddenly everyone's talking about the same book. A teenage girl investigating a murder that supposedly already has a killer behind bars. The comments are going wild. I couldn't put it down, read it in one sitting. Holly Jackson is a genius. Welcome to the phenomenon that is a good girl's guide to murder. But here's the thing, this wasn't just another viral Book Talk moment. This was the birth of a new queen of the mystery. Holly Jackson didn't just write a book, she created an obsession. And if you've been wondering what all the fuss is about, or if you're already hooked and need to know what to read next, you're in exactly the right place. I'm talking about mysteries that'll have you questioning everything, plot twists that'll make you gasp out loud, and characters so real you'll forget they're fictional. Holly Jackson has mastered the art of the page-turner, and today we're diving deep into her world of secrets, lies, and the kind of justice that keeps you reading until sunrise. So grab your detective notebook, metaphorically speaking, because we're about to explore why Holly Jackson has become the author every mystery lover needs on their shelf. Holly Jackson didn't start out planning to become the voice of a generation of mystery readers, but looking back, all the signs were there. Born and raised in England, she studied literature and psychology, and honestly, could there be a more perfect combination for someone who did go on to write psychological thrillers that get inside your head? She spent years working in advertising before she made the leap to writing full-time. But here's what's fascinating, Jackson was always drawn to true crime. She'd spend hours consuming documentaries, podcasts, and case studies, not just for entertainment, but because she was genuinely intrigued by the psychology behind it all. Why do people commit crimes? How do investigations really work? What happens when the system fails? When she sat down to write her first novel, she knew she wanted to create something that felt authentic. Not just another murder mystery, but a story that captured the real complexities of crime, investigation, and the impact on communities. She wanted to write the kind of book she wished she could read, something that respected both the intelligence of young readers and the gravity of real-world issues. And that's exactly what she did. A Good Girl's Guide to Murder wasn't just her debut. It was her declaration that your mystery could be smart, sophisticated, and absolutely addictive. She proved that teenage characters could drive complex plots and that young readers were hungry for stories that didn't talk down to them. Writing style and themes. So what makes a Holly Jackson book unmistakably hers? First, she's mastered what I like to call the modern mystery formula. She takes classic whodunit elements and updates them for the digital age. Her characters don't just follow clues, they create podcasts, analyze social media posts, and navigate the complex world of online information and misinformation. But here's where Jackson really shines. Her protagonists aren't just solving mysteries. They're fighting for justice. Every single one of her books centers around characters who refuse to accept easy answers. They dig deeper when everyone else wants to move on. They question authority when it's uncomfortable. They put themselves at risk because doing the right thing matters more than staying safe. Her writing style is incredibly accessible but never dumbed down. She writes with the pace of a thriller, but the emotional depth of literary fiction. You'll find yourself racing through chapters because you need to know what happens next, but you'll also find yourself stopping to think about the bigger questions she's raising. Jackson has this incredible ability to weave real-world issues into compelling narratives. She tackles topics like victim blaming, media manipulation, systemic failures in law enforcement, and the way communities respond to tragedy. But she never preaches, instead, she lets the story speak for itself. And let's talk about her characters for a second. Jackson writes teenagers who feel genuinely teenage. They make mistakes, they have complex relationships with their families, they struggle with identity and belonging. But they're also incredibly capable and resourceful. Her protagonists are the kind of people you'd want on your side in a crisis, and the kind of characters who inspire you to be braver in your own life. The atmosphere in her books is something special too. She creates this sense of tension that builds gradually, layer by layer, until you realize you're completely invested in outcomes you couldn't have predicted when you started reading. Books in order. Alright, let's dive into the books themselves, starting with the series that started it all, the A Good Girl's Guide to Murder trilogy. A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. This is where it all began, and what a beginning it was. Meet Pip Fitzamobi, a high school student who decides to investigate a local murder case for her senior capstone project. 5 years ago, popular girl Andy Bell was murdered, and her boyfriend Sal Singh confessed before taking his own life. Case closed, right? Wrong. Pip doesn't buy it, and she's determined to prove Sal's innocence. What starts as a school project quickly becomes something much more dangerous. Pip discovers that the people in her small town of Little Kilton have secrets they lines do anything to protect. She creates a podcast to document her investigation, and as she digs deeper, she realizes that proving Sal's innocence might put her own life at risk. This book is brilliant because it captures that feeling of being young and convinced you can change the world, while also showing the very real consequences of seeking truth in a world that prefers comfortable lives. Pip is relentless, intelligent, and flawed in all the right ways. The mystery itself is incredibly well constructed, with clues that feel fair but twists you won't see coming. Good Girl, Bad Blood. The second book picks up shortly after the first, and Pip thinks she's done with investigating murders. She just wants to focus on her podcast and her relationship with Ravi Singh, Sal's younger brother. But when another girl from Little Kilton goes missing, Pip can't help herself. Andy Ward has vanished, and the police think she's just another runaway teenager. But Pip recognizes the signs of something more sinister. As she investigates Jamie's disappearance, she uncovers connections to her previous case and realizes that some secrets in Little Kilton run deeper than she ever imagined. This book is darker than the first, and Jackson isn't shy away from exploring the psychological toll that Pip's investigations are taking on her. We see how trauma affects not just victims, but also those who fight for justice. The mystery is incredibly complex, involving multiple timelines and a cast of characters with interconnected motives. As Good as Dead, the final book in the trilogy takes everything you thought you knew and flips it completely. Pip is dealing with PTSD from her previous investigations, but she's trying to move forward with her life. She's planning for college, working on her relationship, and hoping that her detective days are behind her. But then she discovers that someone has been following her, leaving disturbing messages and making it clear that they know exactly who she is and what she has done. When this stalker escalates to direct threats, Pip realizes she needs to take matters into her own hands. I can't say much more without spoilers, but this book is a masterclass in character development and moral complexity. Jackson explores questions about justice, revenge, and what happens when the system fails so completely that taking matters into your own hands starts to feel like the only option. Now, let's talk about her standalone novels, starting with 5 Survive. This book is Jackson's take on the survival thriller, and it's absolutely intense. 6 friends on a spring break road trip get stranded when their RV breaks down in the middle of nowhere. But this isn't just a mechanical failure. Someone is out there in the dark, and they're not planning to let anyone leave alive. The setup is simple but terrifying. The friends realize that one of them has a secret that someone is willing to kill for, and no one is getting out alive until that secret is revealed. The entire book takes place over one night, and the tension never lets up. What makes this book special is how Jackson uses the pressure cooker situation to reveal character. When people are facing life or death situations, their true selves come out, and not all of Jackson's characters are as likable as you might expect. It's a psychological thriller disguised as a survival story, and it's absolutely gripping. The reappearance of Rachel Price is Jackson's most recent standalone, and it shows her range as a writer. This one's about Bale Price, whose mother Rachel disappeared when Bale was just 2 years old. For 16 years, everyone assumed Rachel was dead, possibly murdered by Bale's father. But then Rachel shows up, very much alive, with a story about being kidnapped and held captive for 16 years. She claims she doesn't remember much about her captivity, but she's ready to rebuild her relationship with her family and restart her life. Bale wants to believe her mother, but something doesn't feel right. The story doesn't quite add up, and Bale finds herself in the impossible position of investigating her own mother. This book explores family dynamics, trauma, and the complicated nature of truth in ways that will stay with you long after you finish reading. Each of these books works perfectly as a standalone experience, but together they show Jackson's evolution as a writer and her ability to tackle different subgenres within mystery and thriller fiction. Best books to start with. So where should you start with Holly Jackson? The answer depends on what kind of reading experience you're looking for. If you want the full Holly Jackson experience, the book that lines help you understand why everyone is obsessed, start with A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. This is her masterpiece, the book that established her voice and introduced the world to Pip Fitzmoby. Plus, if you fall in love with it, you've got 2 more books to immediately dive into. The trilogy works best when read in order. You don't technically need to read the first book to understand the second, but you'll miss so much character development and emotional payoff if you skip around. These books are Pip's journey, and that journey is just as important as the individual mysteries. But maybe you're not sure if you want to commit to a trilogy right away. In that case, I'd recommend starting with 5 Survive. It's a perfect introduction to Jackson's writing style, fast-paced, psychologically complex, and impossible to put down. Plus, it's a complete story in one book, so you'll get a full sense of what she can do without needing to continue a series. If you're particularly drawn to family mysteries and stories about long-buried secrets, the reappearance of Rachel Price might be your perfect starting point. It's her most emotionally complex standalone, and it showcases her ability to write nuanced family dynamics alongside compelling mystery elements. For readers who love true crime podcasts and want that same energy in their fiction, definitely start with the Pip trilogy. The podcast element is woven throughout these books in a way that feels authentic and adds an extra layer of engagement to the reading experience. And if you're someone who loves to binge read series, starting with A Good Girl's Guide to Murder gives you the most content to sink into. You can easily read all 3 books back to back and have a complete, satisfying experience that spans several years of character development. Your reader tips. Let's talk about age appropriateness and content warnings, because Holly Jackson doesn't shy away from serious topics, and it's important to know what you're getting into. These books are solidly upper, which means they're perfect for readers aged 15 and up. The protagonists are teenagers, but Jackson treats her subject matter with the gravity it deserves. These aren't cozy mysteries. They deal with murder, trauma, violence, and complex moral questions. Content-wise, you should be prepared for discussions of sexual assault, domestic violence, drug use, and mental health struggles including PTSD and suicidal ideation. Jackson handles these topics thoughtfully and responsibly, but they're integral to the stories she's telling. The violence isn't gratuitous, but it's present. Jackson focuses more on the psychological impact of violence than graphic descriptions, but there are definitely moments that might be intense for sensitive readers. If you're a parent or educator considering these books for younger readers, I'd recommend reading them yourself first. They're excellent conversation starters about justice, moral complexity, and standing up for what's right, but they definitely require maturity to process. For readers who love these themes but want something a little lighter, start with A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. It's the most optimistic of her books and focuses heavily on the investigative process rather than dwelling on dramatic elements. Holly Jackson has fundamentally changed what a mystery can be. She's created characters who refuse to accept injustice, stories that respect their readers' intelligence, and mysteries that stay with you long after you've figured out whodunit. Whether you're a longtime mystery fan or someone who's just discovering their love for the genre, Jackson's books offer something special, the perfect blend of page-turning suspense and meaningful storytelling. Ready to dive into Holly Jackson's world of secrets, lies, and justice? Head over to hookedtobooks.com for the complete reading guide, including detailed reviews, reading order recommendations, and everything you need to plan your next mystery binge. And once you've read your first Holly Jackson book, because trust me, there will be a first, come back and let us know which twist hit you the hardest. Because if there's one thing Holly Jackson readers love, it's sharing those jaw-dropping moments when everything you thought you knew gets turned upside down. Happy reading, mystery lovers! Your next obsession is waiting.